Good afternoon. My name is Matt Craven.
And I'm Jeremy Wood.
This is our project presentation for the fire rate creation of the ABAT school forest. The description of a project: we were tasked with completing and creating an expanded fire break around the Christmas tree tract on the ABAT school forest near Chula, Georgia. The stakeholders for our project were Mr. Kip Hall and Mr. Dana Lawson.
So, as you can see from this picture, as you can see in this map that was provided to us by Dr. Lane, this is showing the first fire break that was to be completed by all the groups working on fire break creation. And it was right inside the gate to the school forest near the intersection of Adams Road and Willis Still Road on the northeast corner of that intersection. And this fire break enclosing a unit of pine trees, a stand of pine trees on the Christmas tree track. So some of the goals for this project, we were told to clear out ground level and overhanging vegetation inside the proposed fire breaks, as well as overhanging limbs overhanging out into the fire break. We were told to focus on removing larger diameter vegetation by Mr. Lawson, as he said he was going to be bringing in a bush hog to put the finishing touch on the fire break, removing all the small diameter herbaceous and woody vegetation. We were told to focus on the larger things that could possibly, wanted to remove things that could possibly damage the equipment, and as well as removing the limbs that would make it quite treacherous for Dan to come through with the tractor, to avoid him hitting his head on limbs as he was driving through bush hogging. And some of the end goal of these fire breaks is to be able to maintain them, very easily with a backpack blower, and to be easily traveled, by equipment such as an ATV or a tractor or a truck or in any kind of motor vehicle.
The time frame for our project, the due date for completing all field work was Friday, September 11th, 2020. We were both given the task of completing 10 hours apiece of manual labor at the forest, which adds up to 20 hours total of manual labor.
Some of the potential issues that we thought could come up during this project: we were clearing the fire break with hand tools, which is quite labor intensive as well as time consuming. So we ended up, especially with as thick as some of the areas were surrounding and within the fire breaks, we were moving at a fairly slow pace, slower than we kind of expected to begin with. So after a short amount of time working, we realized that we may not accomplish as much as the stakeholders might have originally thought, between our work as well as the combination of all the other groups' work. And we're, potential issue being that the stakeholders may not be completely satisfied with how much work was completed at the end of this project between everyone. And also, as I mentioned, there was multiple groups doing the same thing as us. And with multiple groups working, people working at different times, the work was kind of completed in patches. However, we do know that we were there. We were there to know that the first proposed fire break was completed to the stakeholder satisfaction. But beyond this, we're not exactly sure if we're not really sure what was done by the other groups on the other fire breaks. All of our 10 hours of work apiece was done on the first fire break alone, and we did not venture into additional fire breaks.
Supplies given to us by the stakeholders. Once again, all the supplies were provided by the stakeholders. We were assigned a bow saw mainly, due to other groups possibly being out in the field working with the other materials and supplies, such as I believe one group had a chainsaw, one had a pole saw maybe. But we did the whole 10 hours, 20 hours of work with just the bow saw primarily. Or actually, that's all we had.
So every time we came in to rent out equipment, Dan was explained to us that other groups had already rented out equipment, and it appeared that they had not been returning the equipment the same day that they were working. So pretty well the whole time there was nothing but a bow saw. And as Mr. Craven just said, many other groups utilize things such as, limb loppers, which would have been extremely handy in our adventures, especially with clearing large, large dense privet thickets and things along that nature.
And we eventually went and asked Mr. Hall if it was all right to bring our own personal chainsaw or weed eater or pole saw, but that idea was discouraged by Mr. Hall.
So we ended up just sticking with things that were provided to us, and that ended up being just the bow saw the entire for the entirety of our work on the fire breaks. And with the stakeholders supplying all the equipment that was needed, there was not really a need for a budget. There was no direct financial input from the stakeholders to complete this project. The bow saw that they provided to us, yes, they did buy it at some point, but it was not bought specifically for this project. So it was something that they had already owned. So they just allowed us to use it. And then our field work was we've all volunteered our time and effort as well as our gas money to get to the school forest to work. So really, without us using outside equipment or gas or need for gas or anything like that, there was really no need for financial compensation for us to complete this project. It was kind of just a volunteer effort.
Some of the things we did at the school forest, we cleared some large diameter saplings and other understory vegetation from the existing fire break where it was thick in some spots. We removed some overhanging limbs for accessibility reasons for Dan and the tractor to come in with the bush hog and later on with the ATV. We removed the invasive species such as privet, and other groups actually came up behind us and sprayed with herbicide. But we would have done it if we didn't have any herbicide spray at the time, so we just continued to cut the privet down and drag it out the way. And we tried to be protective of other beneficial species. I know there were some plum thickets and some other type of stuff in there that we
Other various things such as small oak trees or hickory trees, a variety of different plant species that we tried to preserve if possible. Tried to only cut what was necessary, or we did go a little bit crazy at times with cutting invasive species because you can't ever really cut too much of those. And on the back side of the fire break, which this is along kind of the southern line of that first proposed fire break, kind of the southeastern side, we did remove many pine saplings, volunteer pines that were anywhere from 3 to 8 feet in height. We removed these so Dan could come through with the tractor and bush hog safely, without damaging the bush hog in any way. We also did remove a few large overhanging branches, and as you can see in this picture, the tree on the right hand side of the picture had many limbs that were kind of hanging over the proposed fire break at the same time. Excuse us one moment. Have Mr. Craven go turn the light back on. There we go. Sorry about that. Let's say in this picture you can see that we removed some of those large diameter branches while still being able to keep the entire tree. That we trimmed the limbs to where Dan could easily drive through up underneath all the remaining limbs safely. And with this expanding on the backside, the fire break in this area was quite wider than in other places, and there's going to be a good amount of sunlight reaching the forest floor, and this is going to result in more herbaceous growth, and it would, in our opinion, would even be a good candidate for, maybe something like a food plot could be established in this area for wildlife consumption and benefit. But that's, of course, up to the stakeholder with what they want to do with it in the future. But with the advance in herbaceous growth, it may be a little bit harder to maintain this particular section, and it may, take something like a root rake here and there to maintain the fire break.
We removed a couple patches, dense patches of Chinese privet. One stand in particular was on the outside of the stand, but it was leaning over into the stand, and it was getting tangled up with a plum thicket with the crowns. And in those crowns, there was also some sweet gum, not sweet gum, grapevines that were intertangling as well. So what we did was cut the privet at the base and drug it out and out of the stand, and did our best not to mess up the plum that was inside the stand as well. And by removing this, we're hopefully the plum thicket is going to expand and receive more sun and ultimately produce more fruit for wildlife. And plums like fire, so that'll be good as well.
And this was a quite labor intensive process for us. With only having a bow saw, we didn't have limb loppers to chop some of those muscadine vines like Mr. Craven was explaining here. We were having to yank and pull on the privet that we had cut and trying to snake it in, snake it out of the dense canopy. It had pretty well formed, pretty well a privet, kind of like a privet hammock. It was extremely dense, and all the crowns of the individual privet plants and the plums were just completely intermingled, and they were growing above the ground as one. And this is kind of a picture showing the final product. This was right before Mr. Lawson came through with the bush hog. As you can see here, this was just beyond that very dense privet thicket that we were just talking about, and so right at the ground level was pretty bare in this photo because there was little to no sunlight reaching the forest floor in that area. But then just beyond this, you can see on the left side of the picture a very dense muscadine thicket that was going to be extremely hard for us to try and do anything with. It gets fairly narrow between it and that pine tree just to the right of it. But during our last hour of work was when Dan came through with the bush hog. He was able to use the tractor to kind of push that big mass of muscadine vines back to the left, back in away from the stand, and widen out that fire break to the needed width.
Yeah, and that was a big help because what he did is he took the bush hog and raised it up and just set it down on top of a lot of the muscadine. And what he couldn't do that, he just rounded it back up and into the stand, and it widened it out a lot. Because if we'd had to clear it by hand, I guess best way would have sprayed it with glyphosate and wait till it died and carry it off. But
I'd say without spraying it, moving all that by hand to widen that out, it was going to take us a very, very long time, especially with, like I said, with just a bow saw. It would have been next to impossible. But following all the clearing of vegetation that we did, and the bush hogging, the maintenance of this fire break should be very easily, the fire break should be very easily maintained. The goal was to use backpack blowers and occasionally root rakes in a few trouble places to maintain it. The fire break should be easily traveled with various types of equipment, mainly the ATV that we have here for the owl building, and we want to make sure that we get rid of all overhanging limbs to avoid the operator being struck in the head by limbs while they're driving through the fire break.
all of our field work and our hours, they were completed. And before due, actually, I think we completed on a Tuesday, so we were well ahead of schedule.
I believe it was Tuesday, September the 8th.
All the large vegetation that was requested to be moved out, we cleared out along with other groups participating as well. The fire break overall, I believe, looks good and met the satisfaction by the stakeholder. So, in the last hour of our work, we hit on earlier, Mr. Lawson was on the tractor bush hog, and we ran him down on the backside of another stand and asked him to come by real quick and basically bush hog around ours where we've been working. And this is a picture of the final product. After he went down it and we cleared it, he bush hogged it, and it's widened pretty good and clear.
Should be very easily maintained, which is a vast improvement on what this was beforehand. As of last year in the springtime, we actually did burn the stand in the fire ecology class, and Dan and a small group of students had made a temporary fire break, which kind of followed the same path that this fire break that we cleaned out very nice follows. But during that, it was kind of just a hand line, that was created with rakes, and there was fuel draped across the fire break in a couple different spots. And during that fire that we conducted in the spring, the first restoration burn in the stand, the fire did jump over the existing fire break in a few places, in a few small little places as the fire got pretty hot in this stand. But however, with all the work that has been done by us as well as the other groups, this the fire break is now a lot cleaner, and there's a good break in the fuel where the fire should not. If everything is done correctly, the fire should not jump this fire break as long as it is partially maintained, which should be fairly easy to do in the future. And
That concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time.
thank you. Call that good.